too quiet. Where's the on your thing?
And you can turn it up.
Right, okay, we go there. It's not so much for the soundboard one, it's for the first one, just in case.
So that's the first one.
Yeah.
Would you like to check it?
No, it's fine. You can do it fast pace. Whilst if you're standing here when it goes on, you can turn it on when you need to. Yeah.
Do you want to go back to the back and check?
Yeah, it's more because of the way they speak that we haven't got the subtitles.
Coming to those of you getting off the tram, coming to see Disney, walking around.
Right. Sorry, sneaky peek.
People will soon tell you if they can't.
Yeah.
Is that Islington Mill?
Yeah. Yeah, when we went to the walk. Consultation.
Unit 4, isn't it?
Yeah.
The unit part, yeah.
Hello. How's it going? Quite stressful. There are quite a lot of things to juggle with tech.
Yeah, because but if I can stay later, but you tell me.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I think well, you're very welcome to and I'll introduce you to people as well. Bringing those reports now. I must remember to actually announce them.
They're over there, just so you know.
Yeah.
Next to the coffee.
Thank you. I
think we'll go well.
yeah. It's a bit more when you use your own laptop because I now have to weekly printed out myself.
Maybe they can bring it.
It's not. I'm quite good at
So, let you
yeah,
relax.
thanks very much.
Bit.
Yeah, thanks.
I think it's very
How you doing? You look like under a lot of pressure there. Right. Yeah, not bad. How are things?
That's true. They'll probably recognise you. It's the sound of it.
Good to see you. Yeah, nice to see you too. I'll catch up with you in a bit. I'll leave you to your thing anyway.
How are we doing?
Good. Just, I've got one of the films on, and we'll just do the second one now.
Okay. And are we streaming?
Yeah, it's streaming too. Yeah.
Ah, brilliant. Oh, fab.
Okay, so in terms of what's happening there with the camera, people being shot, you'll support it. Is it being recorded? Okay, so I need to let people know that. I've just been asked by that one of the panellists about whether it's been recorded and whether it's chatting out.
Oh, which is the question?
We don't necessarily have to keep it public afterwards. It might be nice to.
Right, okay. I can't see, because I haven't got access to the briefing that I wrote myself, anything that window there. Have you got, are you using your laptop?
No. And do you want to, are you going to be saying anything or are you just going out? Okay.
Turns out it's
Can you find it? I don't need a bunch
Great, thank you so much.
as long as it's in yeah. Right, I think we're going to start very shortly, people, so please charge your teacups and we'll begin. We're trying to coordinate a complicated piece of tech in that we're currently live streaming to the world and also to Southport. Eric, can I just check which microphones do I need to use?
just the one in the room. That one should catch anyone on the table.
Okay. Right.
Just need to flip.
Hello. Can you hear me? Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to open the event. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming this evening. everybody from the public, everybody who's involved in policy practice, who has an interest, a research interest in the topic that we're talking about tonight, which is rather kind of sensitively called culture on the periphery, and I've been struggling to find the right way of framing this, but hopefully maybe by the end of the next couple of hours we'll kind of come out in a way that is less deficit and more kind of positive about the kinds of places and the sorts of practices and processes for placemaking that we're going to be discussing this evening. I'm Professor Abby Gilmore. I'm at the University of Manchester, and I've going to organise this event with my colleagues, Dr. Eric Leibeck, who is currently on Tech Control, and Dr. Bernard Meyer, who has been supporting the organisation of the event. And we wanted to pull this together as a part of the ESRC Festival of Social Science to kind of provide a bit of space to talk about some of the processes of placemaking that we've all been involved in, been researching, in a way that, to look at places that often are off the radar and don't get attention. And I'm really delighted to say that we've also got a number of other important inputs to this event. I'll introduce them briefly now, but you'll hear from them later. So Simon Buckley is an artist, and we're going to see some of his creative film practice shortly. And then also we have an esteemed panel. We have Karen Waterfield, an artist in Southport, Pete Corty, who is Head of Culture and Placemaking in Rochdale Development Agency, Mary Claire Daly, Head of Culture for the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, Dr. Laura Sillers, who's come all the way over from the North East, is the Dean of Culture and Creativity and Director of REMA at Teesside University, and last but not least, Anna Rowe, who is just there in the second row, who is part of MPAC, Project Lead and Figurative for Arts Impact Funding. Anyway, as I said, you'll hear from those later on. Before we start and get into things too far, quick bit of housekeeping. No fire alarms are due, so if it is a fire alarm, then we need to go via the fire exits, which are clearly marked, and the toilets are downstairs, so you need to go down one set of stairs and then down to the basement. Also, in terms of housekeeping, we are live streaming and we are also recording this. So if you have any problems with your voice or your face being recorded, then please tell us and talk to Eric about it, and we'll make sure that we make a note, because we obviously want to protect your privacy and your wishes. And then my other bit of housekeeping really is to thank the funders and the other parts of the organisation that have made this event possible. So obviously it's ESRC is the Economic Social Research Council, who support public engagement of social science. I've also had support from Creative Manchester, who are the research platform at the University of Manchester. And we've also had support from current UK RI Policy Fellowship Award that I'm conducting with on secondment with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, who've supported the production of the new film. So on that, very quickly, here is the running order. No, it isn't. Brilliant. Okay. So in a moment I want to introduce you to Simon more properly, and we'll watch a film that we made, Claire, Simon and I, a couple of years ago now, that came out of some workshop engagements that we'd had with local and regional policymakers and arts leaders, where we wanted to look at particular policy models and ways of bringing culture into local development in a positive way, and not just exploiting it in an extractive way, but finding ways to support the recovery, the revitalisation of places, and places that were particularly on the satellite of core cities. So we'll show you this film shortly, and it's around this idea of creating improvement districts and how they're being implemented in places around Greater Manchester. And then we'll also watch a second film that is just literally just fresh out of the can, and that is where we are kind of focusing on and listening to the voices of people in Southport and hearing about the kinds of activities that are gathering momentum around an organisation that Eric has helped set up in a particular space in Southport. So that's kind of running, and then we'll have a chance to hear from the panellists, a chance for Q&A. If there's any tea or coffee left, please get them. And then last but not least, we'll close the event with hearing from some more creative practice and spoken word from our other participant, Anthony, who's just over there. Okay, so Simon, do you want to come up here?
Not really, but there you go.
The reluctant creative practitioner.
Yeah.
Right, I'm just going to hold this over to you while I set the film up. But I wondered if you could just say a few words about the process.
Yeah, okay, I won't keep you too long. You've got to watch 23 minutes of film. So they're two quite different films, partly just through the practicalities. The first film, say maybe 2 years ago, there are 3 places we visit, Rochdale, Oldham and Salford, and to keep the film at a manageable length by definition, there's a lot to fit into kind of, so in some ways the first film, if you imagine the arc of somebody on a trampoline, and the second film is more the arc of somebody who's pole vaulting, so there's kind of a bit more grace and time on the second one, and the first one there's quite a lot to fit in, and I only watched it for the first time last night, probably for about a year, and it was quite interesting to see how fast it moved. I'm always aware when I go to places that you arrive and, you know, can anything be more than superficial? And I've lived in the area all of my life, so it's not that I'm not aware, for instance, of Oldham or Rochdale, and I work and have lived in Salford. But it's within a short film like this, so the first one in particular was governed by the things that people said. It's quite dry. I think it's quite driven by people's views on process and grant making and stuff, which for me outside of that sounded quite dry, and so my job in some ways was simply to illustrate, to give a sense of what these towns might look like and to perhaps hint at some of the issues that may be there, but it's not like I've gone deeply into those towns and spent weeks there, and I am aware of that. I mean, I was aware quite critically one of the social issues in Salford, the end few frames when you see them passing through the tram, and whilst I was filming next to me was 2 guys smoking crack, so it was kind of, here is your nice film, and here is one of your issues going on like there and stuff. So, so the second film of Southport, I'd say it's very recently done over about 2.5 days filming in Southport, and it allowed, because it's one place, I say, and I wanted to kind of keep it sort of dreamlike and slightly magical, like we used to go when we go to the seaside, but it allows, as I say, for kind of a wider narrative, so it's got a very different feel and a very different pace to it, and the people involved talk about Southport from a very kind of human position. It's less about grants and policy and stuff, although those are hinted at. It's a much more kind of visceral, this is what we need from our town, and this is what we would like to see, and I think the film reflects that. I think I've said enough, haven't I, really? There's no ice creams in between the two.
Thank you, Simon. And yeah, just to say, I mean, the films were made through a particular sort of, not of a verbatim theatre process, but actually through doing walking tours, talking with, in the first case, professionals, and asking them questions about the places that we were visiting. And in the second case, in Southport, going to the engine room and hearing from the different creative communities, recording their narratives, and then layering film over the top. So I'll start the first one off, and hopefully we can sit back and relax if it's going to play.
And obviously, having loads of people getting off the tram, coming to see Dippy and walking around with Dippy toys was a real moment for people to kind of go, blimey, this is actually a cultural event and it's absolutely flooded the town centre. Look at it all. And all the businesses were saying to us, we've got loads of people coming in, it's our busiest trading week, all of this. And lots of people were also saying, by coming to see Dippy, they were coming back into a town centre that they hadn't been to for some time, because Dippy had attracted them, and they were looking around and seeing all this regeneration. So at this end of the town, there's lots of regeneration. So it's been really helpful for us I've been championing the whole point of culture and creativity in the town centre for years. Dippy was a moment where I could really demonstrate to people, look, this is helping bring people back, changing perceptions of the town, there's a real sense of pride, and look at all the people that are in the town centre. So that was quite a pivotal moment for us. Thing we're going to do creatively, what's all this going to be artistically, what it's going to look like, how do we make sure that's inclusive, how do we bring community voice into that co-production model to kind of create the what, not the how, because lots of these things are about how, what is the big idea, what's the big thing we're going to do. And interventions and people being able to see that it's there between now and the end of March 25, because that's our funding period, and some of our capital buildings. But really, then that's the very beginning. So, it will take longer for that programming to come to fruition and to build everything up. So, another 5 years after that, probably. We've got partners who now want to work in Rochdale because we're a priority place. Creative partners who want to bring really exciting commissions and artists and residencies. But I want that to have a legacy, and I want it to have roots. I want it to make a difference locally. And we know that we have a lack of production team, staff, skills, artists. We lack the infrastructure to get there on our own. So if we have this moment, we need to make sure that we milk it for everything it's worth, and that in every activity we are developing our own infrastructure, because in time, that's what will be left. The period of the next investment, Rochdale will have gone from about £800,000 to 9.5 million. So it's a big, big jump, but we're now trying to mobilise all these things at once. So it's really exciting. Just the other side of the train station is where a lot of the South Asian community live, and it has its own completely brilliant, bustling town centre, really, which is really lively. And we're trying to go, this is almost like a sort of a blending moment between the town centre.
Come on, groove with me. Groove, rap, yeah. This is reggae music.
It's a big redevelopment project, which is again linked to the town's deal. We've secured some funding from the town's fund for that project, which is bringing the Tommyfield Market into Spindles. It's going to create a new events space in there, and a new kind of food court, and council offices. Thinking about, what are the assets and the spaces, and how can we make them more available for creatives, whether that's looking at business rates, or, how can the business support people to come into Oldham. We sent the invite out far and wide to invite lots of creatives to come to the table to say, this is the strategy, these are the priorities, how can you support us to take that work forward and deliver it, because we can't do it on our own. And it's not council strategy, it's a borough strategy, it's a borough's cultural strategy. And we've got plans for this building, in terms of how do we adapt the way that people are using libraries, and especially when you think about the cost of living crisis, and more people are, working from home following the pandemic. So for us, it's about how can we get arts and creative cultural activities out into those community centres and get them engaged. And a big part of our agenda that we're going forward with, which is part of our cultural strategy, is around making sure that arts and culture in Oldham is representative of our communities and is co-created with our communities. So that's going to be the focus of our Place Partnership Fund application that we're looking to submit soon. And then we've got a strand around cultural forums and creative networks and spaces. So actually looking at where are the indoor and outdoor spaces for the different creative sectors to really flourish and to attract creatives from out of central Manchester to come and base themselves here in Oldham. So thinking about, what are the assets, the spaces, and how can we make them more available. So we've got the education strand, and then we've got an investment strand, which is really looking at where are the kind of partnership and funding opportunities to bring that work together. And the Creative Improvement District is very much part of that conversation in terms of the Levelling Up Fund and the Cultural Development Fund and all the Arts Council funding pots that are available. UK Shared Creative Fund, there's obviously a cultural strand to that we're looking at.
But it's people, the or whatever. It's things happen between people, and because we decided as a partnership, people's welfare, people are at the center of everything we do, and now we have to mean it.
But actually, the people who live around here are changing. The whole city is changing, the way it's being built and regenerated. To it. The artistic community around, the councillors, everybody's inputted into something which at the end was presented as we. It wasn't us and them.
Council to let us take on the top floor because it took 5 years for them to admit that they wanted to sell it and they wanted it to go to Wrecking Ruin. So some of the Wrecking Ruin is what we've inherited. So we've taken the 3 years of replacing and doing and spending about £20,000 to £30,000 a year on the building, and that's part and parcel of our investment.
You can walk 10 meters and you might be on 3 different organizations' properties. So, it's a jigsaw on who owns what. So it means that the governance on decision making, it's already knitted together. That doesn't mean it's easy, but there's already partnership in just the geography. As we've seen with Hotbed Press and Islington Mill, those landmark kind of miracle decisions changes everything that happens after it.
But the things about the places that we've seen is that they are there. Yeah. They're there, and so actually the miracles, as you call them, are keeping them there.
That's right.
Are keeping their feet stuck in the ground. Don't move us.
Yeah.
Because Media City is amazing, it's really big and shiny. It's also trying to find those more like kind of smaller, intimate opportunities for people to connect with it and to feel more welcoming and accessible than it can feel with lots of steel and glass. But importantly, I think for this group as well is that we're really been trying to drive our visitor destination. So before and through the pandemic, so that we definitely don't become just a business park. We've got a lot of businesses here, we've got a lot of residents. We're also really keen to be a kind of cultural and visitor destination, working with partners like the Lowry.
Hand on heart, outside of, I think, probably the Barbican, there's no other venue with the amount of theatres and gallery space under one roof as there is in the Lowry.
On the one hand, to be absolutely straight, the sort of the 20th century regen, build one big thing and it'll change everything. That's exactly what happened. And economically, it's been hugely successful. Building of the Lowry transformed that area fundamentally. This part of the city will change. It has been changing for the last 15. It will continue to change drastically. So one of the real reasons to be able to deepen into the cultural compact for this area of the city as a CID is at the beginning of the change, early in the change.
Okay, so that's film one. Round of applause. So many of you in this room I've recognised from having been around Greater Manchester for a long time, and you will recognise some of those places. You may see the arc of the film that goes from Rochdale to Oldham, Salford, and you may recognise many of the kind of policy words or key terms. And also, there's quite a lot of mention of money and grant applications and so on, very much in the context of post-COVID recovery and levelling up. So maybe you could hold those, any thoughts or questions that you have about that, and we'll take them through to the panel, because before then I want to try to load up the next film, which, as I said earlier, is very fresh and quite different. So just bear with me while I put this up.
Art is about mark making, story making. What is the history of the place? What is the history of the people of the place? What are the stories that people want to tell today? What marks do they want to make in the places that they live in?
I remember the golden beaches of my childhood and the thing that people used to flock to. You know, when I was a child, the queue to the beach of cars used to go miles back into the village. And it sometimes has that now when it's a very sunny day. But, you know, there's so much possibility and potential in our coastline.
What characterises Southport to me is the pier. It's the second longest pier in the country. It's an iconic structure. You know, it's sort of place that I live outside of Southport now. It's somewhere I would go, you know, come on a winter's morning for a walk. It's part of my childhood. It's somewhere I visited time and time again. And I just think it's so sad that it's fallen into disrepair. And it's just should be, you know, it's valued structure. Something needs to be done about it.
My biggest thing was why the local people don't have a sense of belief in themselves and in their own town. They seem to have been talking their own town down. And my thing was, well, why do you expect anyone to come here if you don't love your own town and talk about it in that sense?
Before there was a very clear identity, and you hear people that you speak to who have grown up here, it was a place where people used to come and shop. It was affluent, people had nice big houses, you had the overspill from Liverpool. It had a very clear identity. I'm not quite sure what the driver of change is in Southport, but I do think it is a town with identity crisis.
There doesn't seem to be any cohesive collective thinking about sort of these places. You know, it's like the building in the Cambridge Arcade, where the BHS building used to be. That's falling apart, and it's going to take a lot of money to put it back. Whoever owns it is just letting it disintegrate. And that arcade, it leads down to the Atkinson. It's a fabulous facility, and again, it's being neglected, and there's no sort of overthinking. There's nobody looking at it as a whole holistically.
It takes forever to get anything done. We've been working on a cultural strategy for 3 years now, and we still haven't got an action plan. And it's you just go, what? Why? It is about being dynamic. Councils are not geared up for that.
This used to be a thriving arcade with lots of businesses, and the businesses have been forced out because the rents have gone up, and so people have left. I mean, there used to be a guitar shop here, there used to be a second-hand bookshop here, which all added to the cultural identity of the arcade. It was thriving. It was a fantastic place to come. It was a centrepiece.
Until the right people come into the right spaces and the right connections are made, I don't think it quite takes off. But it's quite an interesting space to be, because it's quite suspenseful, and people who are the players are waiting for the first thing to happen. Oh, who can I connect with to be able to drive that forward? And then sometimes things like the engine room will come along, or somebody will come with an idea that they've used elsewhere and say, we did this and we can do that, you know, until you find your feet.
This was built in the 19th century as a wellness resort, a kind of a retail space, and a cultural center. And the retail is basically gone due to online shopping. Tourism is gone due to package holidays to Spain. So we really only have one industry left.
I even remember at some point thinking, well, this is a lovely town. There's gorgeous woods and the beach and the beautiful air. But I felt I need to go somewhere where there's something happening and where I feel more included. And then the engine room came along with Eric's wonderful ideas of inclusion. And I actually feel that probably was in part why I wanted to stay a little bit longer. So, because I do feel that we can potentially bring inclusion between different communities.
With the workshops that we run here, you know, we're hoping to engage more and more people to come along and take part in the activities and to get to know each other and to form a sort of community where they feel there is a buzz. And actually when the workshops are going on, there is a buzz. It's a really nice atmosphere in here.
We're really making sure that the arts, the music in particular, are very much front and centre in our curriculums. We're very much celebrating those things. We're investing in them in a big way. And we're starting to kind of see real green shoots in the town locally with, you know, facilities like this and creative thinking that Eric's brought in and other places around Southport that are desperate for this new generation and this new way of thinking, and kind of you've got all of these people that are now coming out and finding their home in places like the engine room and different spaces, and that's placemaking.
I think if artist studios were set up within the sort of the Wayfarers Arcade, I think it would promote, you know, makers, sort of people would come to see the work, you know, and it becomes sort of a hub, an artistic hub, and I think that would be attractive to people.
You know, the best local example we've got is the Baltic Triangle in Liverpool. And really the whole premise of the Baltic was all around, you know, if we build it, they will come. And it was very much this kind of long-term commitment that everyone who was involved in the Baltic put into that this is going to be a 5, 10, 15, 20 year kind of vision that we need to do here. And I think the unique thing about Southport is that it feels a bit like that at the moment as a town.
It's also been nice seeing how the villages have sort of are thriving in a way that they weren't before. So I live in Churchtown, my parents are in Ainsdale, and there really wasn't that much in the villages 20 odd years ago. And I'd love to see something like that now happen in the town centre, and there be like a reason for us to want to come into the town centre.
As far as the art is concerned, I think the architecture of Southport is where the real art is. You only have to go down Lord Street to just see the versatility and the most incredible buildings in the country. And Lord Street itself is just pure art, and even somebody from Paris came over here, I think it was Napoleon, one of the Prince Napoleon, and said, yeah, we're going to design something on Paris, and how wonderful Lord Street is.
The thing that I really hope to see in the future is that be a sort of an anchor institution that kind of reinvigorates the whole Lord Street, because that's the thing that it's almost like a magnetic field that's not expanding. It's just contained in itself. It should really get, as a place, the investment needed to make this a cultural center, whether that's an annual arts festival or a fringe festival. It needs that kind of constant investment.
4 years ago we had Sefton Capital of Culture, and Red Rum was stabled in Southport, the world's greatest racehorse. And they created a 4-storey high Red Rum mural on one of the buildings on the promenade. We have so much heritage and history and so much to build on.
And what Southport would really benefit from, and other seaside towns as well, would be developing policies that tackle the actual challenges that they have, which are not always the same as a post-industrial mining town or an urban neighborhood that's got a lot of waves of immigration, and it just needs the right policy drivers to be put in place.
What's missing is diversity, and I know from my previous jobs, diversity drives progress, and we want diversity here. How are we going to encourage more of it? I'm not too sure.
So rather than try and compete to be the best version of, ice creams and rock candy, I think Southport has that Victorian heritage and institutions like the Atkinson that could make it a cultural center in the Northwest if it wanted to be. But I think that's the big if, is does it want to do that?
That's what art does. It brings people together, it brings you closer to humanity, it makes you feel less isolated, really. Because each different country, each different town, each different person have their own way of life, their own way of living their life. So the more people generating art in a certain community, they're showing the colours of that town, really, of that village, of that community.
I'd like to invite the panel up now, please. We need another couple of chairs. Which I'll arrange. And not at all, you're fine there. Thank you, Laura. Right, so hopefully some of the images and words that you've just been watching and listening to have struck some chords, and I think we have a really, really good people here who can help us discuss this further and maybe bring some light to some of the things. Just quickly to say that the film around Southport was made after the murder of the young girls in Southport and the effects that had on exacerbating racist riots around the country. And we felt very strongly at the time that even though this was discussed a little bit when we were meeting with creative communities, we didn't want it to be the focus of the film, and it was important not to make it totemic or somehow cheapen it. So it was just to acknowledge that had taken place and that was part of the context of the film, but something that we wanted to consciously work with and move away from in terms of possibilities of place there. So we've got an opportunity to hear a little bit more about Southport, and I wanted to start. I've asked people to very briefly describe their stake in the agenda of the discussions today. But I wanted to start with somebody who's come over from Southport today. So, and if you could introduce yourself, Karen, and just say a little bit about who you are.
I've prepared it, so I'm going to read it out. I hope that's okay.
That's absolutely perfect, thank you.
Otherwise, I'll go off on one and you'll be here all night.
I'll pass this over to you, okay.
So, I have a small offering to make today. I'm in the process of refusing to be put out to pasture whilst within the periphery, that is Southport, making work on the periphery of Southport. I live and practice on the northern edge of Southport. I've lived there since 2010, arriving from another centre, Coventry, where I was born. My work in Coventry was on the northern edge of that city, eventually migrating to the centre. I came to the north from the Midlands with a strong track record of creative practice. I didn't manage to bring along with me resources I had enjoyed in Coventry, Arts Council and local funding, heritage lottery support and the developing network of local and international connections, organisations, anchors that came from that place. To me, Southport is creatively challenging in terms of making a locally based living. So living up north, I sought creative work in surrounding more culturally developed places such as Wigan, Salford and Manchester, putting up with long journeys and unreliable trains. But to me, making art where you live is very important. Where you tread and put down your roots matters for expression. So I have steadily developed an outdoor walking practice with more contemplative activities, embracing a healing process at the Sefton coastline and the edge of the Mee. Alongside the developing practice, 5 years as a local councillor on Sefton Council, the borough where Southport is located, I've been able to see the workings of cultural development from different points of view. Working on a small team developing a cultural strategy, I began to witness the challenges for the town and the borough due to the now disparate nature of cultural development within a local council, fractured by austerity, the pandemic, and most lately the tragedy that struck Southport. Whilst on this pathway, I discovered Eric and the engine room in the centre of Southport. In my council role, he asked me what we were doing about the spare wood on the pier. I happened to be the Labour Council representative for the Southport Pier Trust. I had no answer, but passed him higher up the chain of command. In the engine room initiative, I sensed energy, a can-do attitude, a vision, and the subsequent action that I have witnessed as the idea has fired up since. I'm not a councillor now and so can freely be drawn in by the engine room's potential. It's quite a different feeling from the long, slow machinations of cultural strategy development. What's my stake? I'm keen to discover what my isolated creative practice on the periphery of Southport and the borough means for the centre that is Southport on the periphery. and what that centre on the periphery means for my practice. Being independent but part of a whole is something I really cherish.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for those words. If I may ask you to pass to your left, I'd like to go to Pete next.
Is that one?
Oh, yeah. Is it on?
Just need to switch
it on.
Yeah. Shall I just introduce myself?
Yeah, thank you, Pete.
My name is Pete Dorsey. I'm the Head Culture and Placemaking at Rochdale Development Agency. So not Rochdale Borough Council, but the Development Agency. There is a distinction. I think me and my fellow Rochdalians didn't realise we're on the periphery. I think we thought we were the centre of the universe. We were just waiting for everybody else to catch up and realise that. And whilst I do recognise some of those things in that film, there is so much more to Rochdale in terms of the beautiful landscapes, our beautiful heritage buildings, our fantastic cultural infrastructure. And I think there's a lot of stuff we're working on that actually are making a real difference. So I do recognise some of it, and I do recognise some of the challenges, but I think there's so much more positive to be said about places that are on the outskirts of major conurbations, not on the periphery.
Thank you. And I think we can turn back to thinking about some of the processes that you've been leading and with your colleagues in Rochdale and how effective or not they will be. But thank you. The films and visual, as Simon said earlier, that the first film has a lot in it. We tried to pack a lot in it, and in some ways it's a provocation. So please fill in the gaps. So next I wanted to go to MC, Mary Claire. And if you could just tell us a little bit about your stake in this discussion.
Hello everybody. I'm Mary Claire and I'm Head of Culture at Greater Manchester Combined Authority. So that is the 10 districts of Greater Manchester. 3 of them you saw, Manchester, Wigan, I think you'll know the 10 anyway. So I think it probably, for me to explain my work, I'm going to take you on a journey through time. So in 2017, when kind of the devolution deal started happening, I was called into the town hall by the then chief executive, Sir Howard Bernstein, and said, let's do something about culture in Greater Manchester in a devolution context. And so I went, and at the time I was working at the Whitworth, and I went and I wrote a funding application from a building in Manchester for the whole of Greater Manchester, and I did it all wrong. I didn't engage with people, I didn't speak to the districts, I put in a funding bid that was successful, but it was the wrong thing to do. So obviously, I then started speaking to people who worked in the other places, and it fundamentally changed the way that I think in terms of policy making, in terms of investment, in terms of the way that we work with and respect and love each of the 10. And so we inherited a funding mechanism which was very, very weighted towards giving money to places with really strong cultural infrastructure. So we invested into organisations. And so one of the first things that we did was we said, actually, is there a better way that we can invest that says, okay, well, these anchor institutions, they are brilliant and they should be supported and they are part of an ecosystem. But what about those places that don't have those anchor institutions? Are we saying that they don't have culture, that they should be supported, that they don't have, that we shouldn't work with them? And I think the way that we invested skewed towards not working with and understanding places. And so since then we've been on a kind of journey of repairing the damage I did back in 2017, but also really working with places on how they want to develop. So we had a cultural strategy, and when we did our first cultural strategy in 2018 for Greater Manchester, none of the boroughs, even Manchester I think had a 2-page cultural ambition, but it didn't have a culture strategy. So we've just published ours, and now every single one of the 10 has their own. They are much more confident and bold in articulating what their ambition for their place is. So it's not Greater Manchester sitting here going, we're going to tell you what to do in Rochdale or what we think good looks like in Rochdale. It's about Rochdale defining that for themselves and working with their residents, and us finding a way that our funding mechanisms and strategies supports that. So one of the ways is creating improvement districts, and that's where a member of our team gets seconded to a place for 1 day a week and really kind of works to support and work with the place in the way that the place wants to work. So yeah, there's lots of, I think my main thing is around respect for the things that are already there and that are beautiful, and finding a way to make our policy and funding fit those rather than the other way around.
I'd like to turn to another part of the country, but still in the north, next, and ask Laura, if you would mind, telling us a little bit about your stake in this agenda, and maybe a little bit about what you're doing at the moment.
Thank you. I haven't prepared any beautiful words like you have. I'm based in Middlesbrough and run an organisation called Lima, which is a really beautiful gallery. It was established in 2007. It was established really as a modernist engine really for fine art, culture, what have you, but it became really a community hub intersecting with art and culture in quite an innovative manner. But I think the reflections that I want to make are more, there's a heart pull on everybody's story, and yet there's a pattern in everybody's story, and I wonder how many towns and places we could bring into the room and we would all say the same thing. No one understands us. No one gets what's great about us, but yet also we're really angry about the fact that some of our place isn't as good as we want it to be. And I suppose rather than adding to the chaos of trying to make a case for Middlesbrough, which has got some wonderful things about it, absolutely, I would ask us to reflect on what do we do about that, because you know, when resource is low, the first thing that come out are the sharp elbows. And actually we do have lots of assets, but we are going to need to find new ways of working, because there is only a finite set of resources. And honestly, I think you could pour endless money into any of these places and make them shiny and make them new, make them, you know, sparkly. But is that also what we really want? So that's really just a provocation to bring to the table.
Thank you, and a nicely timed one, because I want to go to our final panellist, which is Anna Rowe, who may have some suggestions in terms of describing her stake that are about the money and forms of investment. And then after that, maybe we'll go back to hear from Pete a bit more about what's been happening in Rochdale and whether you feel, you know, significant investment through building up funding and other funds is making a difference. So over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you for having me. My name is Anna Rowe. Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner. I've come on today. I enjoyed the variation on the song. My role is I am a project lead for an initiative called New Philanthropy for Arts and Culture, which is an Arts Council funded initiative. And we've been going about 5 years, and our specific remit is to get more people to give money to arts and culture. Everyone in the room thinks this is a good idea. Question from Arts Council: how do you get more people to give money to the sector? Can we do it by creating a network of philanthropists across the country? Quick answer: no, because the people who give money to, for example, the Central Library in Manchester are not the same as the people who like to go to the Royal Opera House. They're not the same as who would go to Lima in Middlesbrough. So how have we been going about this? And the answer is that we've been putting together place-based partnerships. We can go 15 rounds on how you describe place. That's how we start with each of our partnerships. I did a 2-hour seminar in Brighton the other day. We got to the end of it and somebody said, oh, we're Brighton and Hove, so we have to go all the way back and change our place to Brighton and Hove. But the work that we do is to create partnerships in locations across the country, across England. There's quite an overlap between the Arts Council's priority places and the workplaces that we're working, which is not surprising because we're Arts Council funded. So we've been working in Burnley, Hastings, Middlesbrough, Gloucester, Bradford, Scunthorpe, Brighton, Sunderland, Stoke, Birmingham. It's a really interesting and diverse list. And our role in each case is to advocate for philanthropy. It's to work with partners, which might be local authorities, it might be cultural compacts, it might be cultural partnerships, it might be the cultural sector, ideally all of the above. We support our partners in developing what I would call the philanthropic case for support for that location. There are a lot of overlaps between the organisations. Most places you say, what are the main problems? And everyone says, we haven't got enough money. That's normally the first answer. And of course the context is very well understood. Arts Council funding has been flat for years. We know from the budget that DCMS is about to get squeezed. There are some levelling up projects which may not be funded. I heard a horror story this morning that the election of Donald Trump means our defence budget has to go up and therefore arts and culture is going to get squeezed. Trusts and foundations are paying down, local authorities have less money. Meanwhile, costs go up. So how is the sector going to be funded? And the solution is to try and find people with money, with wealth, to give. And so we've been working to do that. One of the things we've done is create a new match funding partnership with the Big Give, which last year raised nearly 3 million for arts and culture, which I'm really delighted about. You'll find some postcards at the back, which is a plug for that. And the idea is to use matched funding raised centrally to encourage philanthropists to support arts organisations. And there was some really notable success stories. I'll give you one from Sunderland. Sunderland Culture had never raised money from individuals before, and they were very hesitant to join in the programme. I was really sure that they should do it. Anyway, so I said to them, have you got any data? Do you know any people who might support you? It turned out that at the museum, the Glass Museum, and people who bought tickets and gifted their tickets, so they had all their names and addresses. I thought, well, let's start by writing to them. Anyway, the punchline is 240 people donated and they raised 27,000, which having never done it before, I thought was an absolute triumph of having just the guts to ask for money and the match funding to stimulate it. So it's not a golden, silver, whatever colour it is, bullet, but it is a start, and I really look forward to talking to esteemed colleagues about how we might take the journey, the philanthropic message, into each of these wonderful places, because they all deserve support. I want to finish with a quote with Nicholas Sirota. A few years ago when we started New Philanthropy for Arts and Culture, we did some research into what motivates philanthropists to give, and we did some research into why rich people don't give their money away, which is quite interesting. And we published some case studies about cultural organisations with social impact. And we asked Nick Sirota to write a foreword to our, and he said, his quote is, "Why should philanthropists support cultural causes? The simple answer is that arts, culture and creativity change lives. They promote well-being, they ease loneliness, they enable individuals, communities to tell their stories, along with many other benefits, to which I would add economics, and of course making places into locations that people want to live, work and play."
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, let's dive a little bit more deeper into this. So we've had a challenge from Laura that is it just all about the money and does it really make a difference? We've also had kind of a spatial challenge from Karen about being both isolated and at the centre, but also on the periphery, but making that work for you. And Pete's already rebuffed the whole idea of periphery, and Rochdale is the centre. So tell us a little bit more, Pete, about what's been happening in Rochdale and how what has been the strategy. One question I have is, having a cultural strategy just enough? What else do you need to make change happen?
It's been happening for a long time, actually, since 2018, 2019. And actually, it's about listening for me. And yes, we did create a cultural strategy with the support of Arts Council England, and interestingly, going back to Mary Claire's point about having that strategic base. I was the senior relationship manager covering to support councils and impress upon councils the need to have a cultural framework to support long-term development of culture and not just infrastructure. For me, places aren't built on bricks and mortar, they're built on the people that occupy those spaces, and those are the people that we need to be talking to. So it started with a piece of work with residents, talking about what culture meant to them, what did they want to see happen in their local place. That led to a cultural strategy being developed, and then a series of other strategies that sat and underpinned that strategy. So the cultural asset strategy, what physical assets did we have that we could utilise and support the long-term development of cultural infrastructure and support our artists and our communities engage in culture. There was another piece of work that made the case for festival and events. For Rochdale, engagement had been really low, and investment from Arts Council had also been really low for a number of years. And we thought that festival programmes were an easy way to engage in people who might not walk through the doors of a cultural building, but can actually experience something high quality in the public realm. There was a visitor economy strategy that came out of that, and also a creative economy strategy that sat as part of that suite of documents that helped departments across the council understand the benefits and impact of culture. We were made a priority place by Arts Council, as my esteemed colleague Darren Bryce mentioned in that first film, and that is because of that low levels of engagement and low levels of historical investment. I think that landscape has shifted, so we've just got our latest stats back. The team, I should have said that in my introduction, the team that I head up is an enabling and facilitating function. That's how I describe it. There are 6 people in my team holding the ring for 6 separate functions. So our job is not to go out there, the last thing Rochdale needs is another bureaucrat devising cultural projects. Actually what we want to do is enable and facilitate our communities and our arts communities to come together and tell us what it is that they want. So we've spent a long time developing this policy framework, and the last year has really been about delivery. We've been very lucky. We have had Arts Council funding, cultural development funding. 2018-19, £504,000 was invested by Arts Council in Rochdale. And enabled us to do was actually start to deliver and implement all of those strategic programmes with those communities and with our partners, like the Cultural Co-op, which is our CPP, like Create Rochdale, which is our LSEC, and then the whole raft of other organisations. Last year, our engagement levels were 83% of people in Rochdale had engaged in culture, in a cultural activity. The year before, it was 32%. So money does make a difference, but actually having that policy framework and that political support, I would also argue, is critical. So I just want to come back to your point about philanthropy. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because philanthropists will fund the things that they know and they enjoy, but they won't necessarily know about Breaking Barriers, who's working, a diverse-led organisation that's working in Rochdale. How would they? Well, let's tell them. Yeah, exactly. But I guess that's the challenge, isn't it? I think there is a kind of political thing where money is filtered down, and I kind of think we need to kind of encourage people to think about supporting those organisations from the ground roots up. We have a cultural compact. Rochdale is the home of the cooperative movement, and that brings together 6 working circles, all with a particular focus. And each one, and they're not just cultural organisations, they're community residents, they're different kind of organisations who are setting the agenda, because they are the ones that are talking to people on the ground about what culture is, what it means for them, and how they want that to respond to their needs. That's probably quite a lot, isn't it, talking.
No, but thank you very much. I want to come back again, and I will come back to you, Karen, shortly, but to hear more about Southport and get more perspective from the artists and the creators' point of view. But before that, I want to go back to, we've talked a little bit about philanthropy and the kind of conditions of place and being able to draw in quite large, significant funding for at a particular period of time. And the impacts of that. For you in Middlesbrough and in Teesside University, I wondered if you could say something about the kind of partnerships and the development of the relationships between institutions and with communities, and how that is working for you.
So, just for the record, money is very useful, and but I suppose I try and challenge myself to not just put that first, but to put the other stuff first. So, Mima, the gallery, was built by the local authority, and it landed in the town in 2007. And for all of us in this room will remember that that wasn't a great year for launching a big new shiny art gallery in quite a deprived location in some ways. So it had a challenging start as the financial crisis hit, and making the case for why to have an art gallery in a town where people were losing their homes. That out of that crisis really came quite a powerful partnership by which Teesside University, working with the local authority, became the host, the owner of the gallery, and out of which came all kinds of amazing collaborations. We set up an art and design school, which became the School of Arts and Creative Industries. We've set up courses, we've set up all sorts of community projects within Mima. We set up our Creative People and Places project, Borderlands, which works between Middlesbrough communities and Redcar and Cleveland. We developed a Middlesbrough Cultural Partnership, which I think has 49 organisations on it working together, developing both a capital strategy that we had cultural development fund investment in, and that team want to make our train station the most creative train station in the country. We put artists in there doing wild and wonderful things, and to make the town the most creative town in the country. So there's tons of ambition and there's tons of collaborative working. We've set up, we supported from Mima a very bright young team to establish the Art Weekender, which is now the Art Week, and has literally hundreds of artists and communities and audiences engaging with it. So there's loads and loads of wonderful things happening. And there'll be loads more wonderful things. I suppose what I'm trying to scratch the nerve on, though, is what's our... As we tell these stories, sometimes with... I mean, I did like your point about we are the centre of the universe, and I come back to a sort of memory of before I worked in Middlesbrough. I worked for a long time in Liverpool, and there was a standing running joke of one Scouser says to another, "What's the second city of England?" And the other one said, "Well, I think it's London, mate." Because that spirit of place is really powerful, and a lot of people in Middlesbrough do have that amazing spirit. But I'm really aware that we're in this big cultural system, and at the same time in the industrial strategy, the creative industries are in that industrial strategy. And I think we need to be asking ourselves a little bit, what does success look like? Because absolutely, we've all committed our working lives to transform these places and to connect and to be as inclusive as possible, and we'll keep working together, and we'll keep doing this good work, and some amazing examples here, really moving. But what are we trying to achieve for our places that takes us to the next level? Because I don't want to be levelled up.
Hello. Yeah, sorry. I think that for me, it's not necessarily about money. It's about fairness, and that is fairness of opportunity and fairness of investment. I think I was on a roundtable thing the other week, talking to somebody who works in the screen industry in the North East, and they said that there's something about this fundamental, almost human right that somebody can work on a production and sleep in their own bed at night. And that just, you know, and this is the thing that we don't have. We don't have that fairness of opportunity. There are people who have to take, you know, if they want to work on a particular film or a particular broadcast, they have to move away from their family for a week. That, you know, already reduces the kind of diversity of people who are able to do that, because if you've got care responsibilities, if you haven't got the finances to do that. So I think there's something really, really fundamental about fairness and equality of opportunity, and that should, for me, that's what the thing is, that somebody doesn't have a less opportunity because they're in Middlesbrough or because they're in Rochdale than somebody would have if they were based, I don't know, in Kent. And that might be investment, but it also might be that they can go and stay with their family after working for a day on a shoot.
I also think about who are we doing this for and what are we measuring this success. You know, it's kind of, I do get frustrated when we start talking about all this. I used to work in Islington, where the first conversation that I always encouraged anybody to have was to go to planning and try and unlock some funding from Section 106 for creative workspace or what have you. You could do that then, although there's a slightly converse problem in Islington, because the rates were so high that even if you gave the buildings away in Old Street to artists, they couldn't afford the rates. But there is an issue here, I think, about this whole levelling up agenda. What are we measuring here? Is it about land values going up? And actually, who are we making the money for in that case? Who are the beneficiaries? What do we talk, when we talk about kind of, you know, economic development, what do we really mean by that? Are we talking about an inclusive economy where everybody benefits and culture is a key part of that? Or are we talking about a different landscape and different beneficiaries? For me, it's really important that the people of Rochdale, and it is actually, it's one borough, but it's 4 towns, each with a very different and distinct, I would say, look and feel and certainly attitude. Middleton thinks it's Manchester. I'm being serious. Rochdale thinks it's more Lancashire. And you know, the Pennines thinks it's more Hepton Bridge. So it's kind of like, how do you take those distinct characters and respond to those people and actually provide the kind of cultural infrastructure that they want? You know, not that we as policymakers think they should have. So that's why I come back to that issue about respect and kind of listening to people and actually creating policy frameworks that support people to have and unlock their own creativity too. So a great deal of our investment at the moment is around children and young people, providing those pathways into employment, because they've been out of the way. They've not had access. We're 12 minutes away, Rochdale is 12 minutes away, just another plot from Victoria. So the issue for me is Manchester has spent a lot of time and money and investment in supporting the cultural infrastructure here. There's been a lot of government money being pumped in, very much supported by Manchester City Council. But actually, from a GM perspective, how do we make sure that those benefits are also coming out to some of those outlying areas? I keep saying to the pubs in Rochdale, great pubs by the way, another club, with live music, very good real ale, you're not in competition with each other. You're in competition with the Northern Quarter. So actually you need to work together, promote your offer, make sure it's a regular thing, and then tell people about it. You'll see adverts for Rochdale Creates, which is our cultural compact, and our website that connects the sector together in Victoria Station, because that's our market, as well as our own local residents. So our big, we've just submitted to our council a big place partnership fund, which is really about trying to consolidate those gains that investment has just brought us, and I just talked about that. But it's about audience and market development. It's about skills and talent development. It's about investment in our children and young people to make sure that they have access to quality jobs, and that arts and culture, not just in the creative sector, but they're given the confidence and capacity building to make sure that they're able to access the wider job market. So, you know, it's who are the beneficiaries actually of some of this investment that we're putting into cultural placemaking.
Thank you. Just to respond briefly to that, I think you've mentioned some words that are really key here, and that we might move on to thinking about in terms of not just how place-based policy, which is sort of what we're talking about really, is, you know, policies that are developed and strategically work with place to looking at how national policy might support change and achieve those kind of parity of outcomes that you were talking about, Marie-Claire, that more broader equality, the fairness, equality of opportunity that is not place blind, but is also equitably distributed across different geographies. And one of those words that I picked up on was that idea of competition. And of course, when the more resources become tight, the more competition happens. But also how that might be allied to, spatial mobilities and where people are able to move to, which you've already talked about. Research that we've been involved in and we drew on for the Beyond the Creative City project that the first film came out of, with Professor Bruce Taylor of Manchester University, helped to identify the Greater Manchester area where actually you see these creative economies, where these clusters are. And the cluster theory that is very much at the heart of the industrial strategy and that is driving economic growth as the fastest growing sector in terms of GVA, or one of the fastest, although actually if you look at the detail, another of the DCMS sectors, the civil society, that GVA was accelerating higher in the years after COVID than creative economy. Just interesting statistic there that isn't much talked about. But creative clusters are only in some places, and across the Greater Manchester area we can demonstrate that they are in the places where there is already most prosperity. And so the areas that cannot support them or do not have the cultural and social capital to manage and run a business means that the kind of potential very hyper-local economic effects of creative clusters may not be felt everywhere. I did want to bring Karen in and to get a sense of, I was really struck when we visited Southport about, it is kind of on the edge. It's got big sky, it's got some beautiful landscapes. In some ways it probably doesn't have the kinds of deprivation that Rochdale has, maybe.
It's got pockets.
It has pockets. Yeah, every place has pockets, don't we? We live in a very, very unequal country. But from the creative's perspective, what works? What is needed? What kinds of cultural infrastructure? I mean cultural infrastructure in a really broad sense, to include education, value frameworks, programming, not just bricks and mortar. What are the desires and needs from a creative perspective in a place like Southport that allows and supports creatives to do what they want to do, and that to support their practice in place, but then doesn't gentrify, doesn't drive them out because rates or rents rise. Have you got some thoughts on that, please?
I have, yeah. I think, first of all, I'd like to say that I'd like to ask the question, where is the artist on this table? I am an artist, okay, and I'm the voice of the artist, but I have been in that world of culture speak. And to be honest, the feeling of the artist in this world is this. You just don't know, you can't understand it, you don't know what they want, you don't know what they're talking about, you don't have all the words, you don't understand all the abbreviations, you know that if you're not in the know, you're not going to get the money anyway. If you're not sort of accepted by a gatekeeper at the Arts Council, you don't get a look in. That's what it feels like trying to make work when most of the people in a room will be paid to do what they're doing. There's sort of many layers of infrastructure that are there for us to try and understand how to get through and speak the right language in order to say the right things and tick the right boxes. I'm sure you've heard this many times before, but out in Southport, I just decided I'd had enough. I'd had enough of trying to make a communal act that is theatre. So I thought, right, I can't afford the space.
spaces in the Atkinson. I'll use the coastline. That will be my stage, and I'll do it on my own because I can't afford to pay anybody. That's the problem. That's the problem of isolation. But that is the challenge and the beauty of being in a place like Southport, because nature gives it to you, and in the end, you fall back on your own resources, and something happens that makes you not feel so resentful in the end, I think. And I suppose I am giving out a lot of that kind of, well, they don't understand and that. But there are a lot of people that are gathering around the engine room now with this need for resource, as in sharing with each other, but not wanting to have to talk the language just in order to get the funding. We didn't. When I was a councillor, I was begging them to open up the cultural strategy to people to talk about what they wanted. It was always the same people at the table, the ones who were defending their jobs, worried whether the Atkinson might never, exist after, in the long run, because we're having a great big civics space built, MLEC. There's lots of capital projects going on in our place, loads of money being spent, but the people who should be consulted and part of that concept right at the beginning, they should be part of it, and it's their place. It's not the planner's place. They don't even live there, the planners. Sorry, I'm getting carried away now. Apologies, and I don't mean to disparage what you all do beautifully, but I've given up on it. I'm too old now, so I'm here.
I just want to say that I absolutely agree, whereas the artists. So in Rochdale, we have made a commitment, because you can't do strategy without artists around the table. You can't do any of that thinking or planning. So we made a commitment that we would pay artists a proper day rate to attend any of those kind of planning meetings, or structural meetings, particularly the freelancers. I'll be honest with you, not necessarily the ones that come from MPO organisations, because they're already funded, but those organisations that aren't, or freelancers, we made a commitment to pay them their daily rate, and I think that absolutely has to be it. But I would also go a step further than that. Our CPP, Culture Co-op, also pays for community connectors in those key areas, those where not the overstep. We'd be very careful about looking at where people are underserved. So we pay community connectors in the local environment to tell us what it is that they need and want from a cultural strategy.
Thank you. I'm aware that we've been talking for a very long time, and I'd like to open up shortly for any questions from people in the audience, or from panel members to each other. I'm also aware that Laura needs to go. She needs to head back to the other side of the periphery. So I just wondered, and I can see that Anna's also keen to say something. But before then, if I could ask Laura, if there's anything that you wanted to add to this conversation before you dash back to the northeast.
Thanks, and thanks everybody. And I'm sorry, I do have to go because I have a 10-year-old who has a babysitter, and she'll just about stay if I get there just after 9:30. She's watching. I thought your point was very powerfully made. Like, the creatives and communities need to be there. Sometimes I do feel that it's our job as paid people in this sector to be able to channel into some of this world some of that, so that I think some of it's a burden. I'm often balanced between, at the moment, on Monday I attended a big discussion with other arts organisations similar to mine about how do we lobby for the future of our art centres, because many of them are now really, really struggling. And a lot of the discussion was, well, we need our artists, we need, and I felt really conflicted, if I'm honest, because actually we need to create space for our artists to be artists, not to have to do all of the lobbying and the heavy lifting on our behalf. That's why I get paid a salary, and I think I need to do that on behalf of our artists. Whether we can do it well enough and whether we need to listen hard enough and what kind of interaction goes behind that, that's maybe a different question. But I don't want to burden our most brilliant people with the job of having to raise money for, frankly, systemically underfunded cultural sector for multiple decades. I mean, that's maybe another bombshell for anybody. Sorry, that's my target today. The other thing that I wanted to say is there's not just one thing. I feel like sometimes we're seeking for the just one thing, the policy lever, that big bit of investment. And those things, there's no one perfect thing that's going to solve all of these issues. We're working in a system. And in terms of the access and equity, I absolutely agree. You know, one of the big things that I've been doing over the last few years is working with students in developing creative career structures, and I know who said that just wants to sleep in their own bed at night, and that's a thing we talk about a lot in terms of how do we create an equitable creative economy into which our students can actually have a job that makes them feel dignified and earn enough money to make going into this industry worth it in the first place. So I don't have all of the answers, but I think one of the things, the issue of trying to create a picture, a visual of something which is systems orientated and shows all of these things happening at once might be something that we could work towards.
Sorry. Strange you should say that. That's just what I've decided I'm going to do for my GCMS research. I'll keep you posted on that. Anna, thank you so much, Laura. Thank you very much for your contribution and safe journey home. Anna, did you have a comment that you wanted to throw in before we open up to the floor? So think of your questions now, please.
Well, I thought it might be worth turning the discussion on to a slightly more optimistic note. We've talked about a lot of challenges and we've talked about a lot of issues, and certainly from the point of view of fundraising and fundraising from individuals, doom and gloom is going to get you £0. And so I think it behoves us as a sector to tell positive stories based on our art, based on the creativity, based on the opportunity, based on the social impact, based on the fact that arts and culture improve lives, based on the fact that we can make a better place, based on the fact that arts and culture give people joy. We learned that during the COVID. People haven't realised, imagine COVID without any art and culture. So it behoves us to sort of turn the conversation around and tell positive stories to people who might support us. And I think that the role that philanthropy can then play is to, if you will, plug some gaps. What happens after the priority places move on? Will they always be priority places? What about the places that are next in line? There's going to need to be some additional funding streams to fund the legacy of all the wonderful programs that you were just describing. So I'd like to feel that there's an opportunity to engage with new funding sources through telling our positive stories, and over time to increase the funding for arts and culture. We did a survey of 1,500 high net worth individuals, and they were asked to choose 3 sectors of charity world that they wanted to, or they viewed as worthy of support. 20% of them chose arts and culture. Now this is an interesting statistic. I don't know if you know how much philanthropic support goes into arts and culture currently. I'll give you a clue, it's less than 20, it's only 3. So if we could grow that pot, wouldn't that be a wonderful outcome?
Thank you. I like to finish discussions on positive notes and then turn it over to you guys. So are there any questions from the floor?
There's one online.
Hmm?
There's one
online.
online.
Oh, online. Yes, thank you, Eric. Could you possibly read it out into the microphone?
Sure. Does it reach? How can we attend to the well-being of our communities so that they can get out of survival mode and into creativity? We speak of creatives, as I understand that creativity can be a luxury. So this is coming from Southport, and I suppose some of the survival mode needs to be overcome, and a lot of coastal towns have these kind of multiple layers of deprivation. So creativity might be one of those like third or fourth on the list of priorities. So how do we get people into those?
So the idea of arts and culture is a nice to have. Mary-Claire?
Yeah, so I think understanding where our limits are. Like, you know, we've got a policy in Greater Manchester called Housing First, and the idea that if you have a house, then you know, if you give somebody a safe, warm, that will be the basis from which everything, from like our economy, from our well-being, from which everything will flow. Are we the best people, like in the cultural sector, to do the housing first stuff? There's so many kind of complex, and I work with the team who work on housing first, and I understand that housing first approach is absolutely what is needed. Am I the right person with a cultural policy background to be doing that work? I don't think so. I can bring kind of people who have real specialisms in working with people who are in kind of complex situations, and I don't think it's necessarily an either or. I think, you know, we've got an amazing organisation in Greater Manchester called Portraits of Recovery, and they do such brilliant work with working with people in addiction or living with addiction, and how actually culture creativity is the thing that helps them to express themselves and get out of a kind of doom spiral that they might be in, where they're just being passed from service to service to service. So I think there's one bit is saying, okay, well, we need to find out who is doing that work, and we need to understand what that work looks like, and how does our work kind of work with that. But I also I worry about culture being the fix for everything. We know we're like massively underfunded. We know that buildings, people are on their knees at the moment, and I think that trying to with compassion and care understand things that aren't necessarily that we can't. We're not the best people to sort.
I think you identified the intention of that really well. Pete, Nana and Karen, do you have anything else to respond to for that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that culture plays a significant role though in helping individuals build their own capacity and tackle some of those challenges. So, you know, the roof over their head is fine, or something getting wet, but actually in order to kind of move forward. So in Islington we had the Word Strike, the Word Festival, which was a basic reading and writing festival through our library centres, working with cultural organisations. It was just about trying to get people to kind of rediscover the sheer joy of learning. And discreetly, it was about trying to provide people with an opportunity to develop their language skills, literature skills, to get them on a pathway into employment. Do you know what I mean? But that was the last thing we sold it as. Can you imagine for that brochure? But it was very much about trying to use arts and culture to help build capacity in individuals and give them the confidence, self-esteem, to actually take advantage of the wider opportunities, that are wider fundamentals that need to be serviced with. But I don't think it's one or the other. There are always competing demands.
I think that kind of processual a conduit idea of culture is really important, and I think that's where building on the idea of cultural infrastructure. You know, we're currently in an amazing asset in the terminology in the middle of central Manchester as part of a broader library service that brings incredibly important values to people's everyday lives. And in that sense, it's really thinking about culture as infrastructure. It's infrastructure that enables more generative value to kind of be developed, whether that's well-being, whether it's economic, certain kinds of economies. So thinking about that conduit to well-being and to cultural development, I think is really important. Anna, did you have a point? Or are there questions from the floor? Yes. Can I please?
It's all right. I used to be a teacher.
Thank you.
Okay. This is an observation, not criticism, but there hasn't been much mention of children and schools, and I wondered what your panel's reaction would be if the arts in general were given higher priority in education, since we're all aware that they've been cut enormously in recent years because of the emphasis on STEM, science, all that kind of stuff. And that's taking what you're talking about lower down the age range, because in that society, schools are funded anyway. So we're not talking money, we're just talking a greater emphasis in education on the arts. And what do you think the impact of that would be on the kind of work that you do?
It's almost like you read my mind. The previous question was how to, have more space for creativity, and my answer was going to be, you've got to start early, you've got to embed it from, preschool going into primary school, and I completely agree with you that having more arts in the curriculum is fundamental. It's very well documented, isn't it, that arts and creativity improve education outcomes, all the things you were talking about in terms of confidence and ability. There's a longitudinal study that the Royal Shakespeare Company has done about drama workshops, and they've proven that these kids who've done the workshops have got better GCSE results. That's a fantastic, tangible fact, but even before that, it gives the children confidence and self-belief, self-esteem. I'm a freelance, so this is one of the things I do. Another thing I do, I run a music festival, and we do music workshops in primary schools. Every year we have 300-400 kids coming off, it's only a little festival, and every year we get feedback from the teachers that says that the kids who don't participate in mainstream education come out and participate in the music workshops. And it enables children with learning difficulties to participate, and that they go back and then they have a more engaged experience in the classroom. So I would like to hold on to that. I suppose I should link it back to my philanthropy role. The story I've just told you, I've told to many funders, and I've told to many individuals who support my little festival, and they're really motivated by that. They like to think that the 100 quid they've put into the festival has changed a child's life. And that's a really tangible thing that as arts sector story that we can tell to someone who might help us.
Just dead quickly, I think I'm just going to be doom and gloom again, like we go from the hospital and now being miserable with you. But I think if one of the things that we're talking about kind of on the periphery or in places that, like, one of the things that we do see is that schools in areas of kind of significant deprivation do not have the same level of provision. They do, it's so patchwork and so based on whether you have a particular teacher who has a particular kind of penchant for the arts, who is prepared to link in and go above and beyond. And I think that again, when we're talking about all of those like beautiful things that absolutely do happen on the ground in reality at the moment, there is a many layered system of any kind of creative or cultural education within schools. And so I think that it's so beautiful, which makes it so frustrating that it is so unequal.
Yeah.
Can I just add something else to that? Right, because I hope that policy framework will change, and actually we will see arts embedded in the curriculum over the next 5 years. I think it goes further than that though. I think in terms of our cultural organisations, one of the other things that we're trying to do is look at youth governance models and how we encourage young people to be part of organisations' governance models to make sure that they are providing the kind of services that they actually want, not somebody my age thinks they want. So, there's a whole raft of work around there, around supporting young producers, training so that they're actually delivering the kind of activities that they need. So it's not just in formal education, I think the same is true in informal education settings too.
Can I just say something quick?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here if I hadn't had a creative education, basically, and I became a drama teacher and worked with youth theatres, and we were doing all that kind of thing, but somewhere along the way it got lost. I mean, creative based, but it's being sort of organised now and done to us rather. Sorry to go down a little hot rabbit hole there.
No, not at all. A rallying cry. I think the message is clear. And I am aware of time and people's energy levels, and it's getting later in the evening. I wanted to give a chance for any final questions or comments from the room. Yes.
Sorry. The microphone. This is going to be the most anxiety of my day. Yeah, so I just wanted to ask the question about, we talked a lot about bringing people into the discussion and making sure like local voice is heard, which is like essential. But I suppose my challenge and question would be, how do we make sure we're involving people who don't feel like it is their place or space, or haven't been engaged through arts and culture through school, and automatically switch off? And how do we involve them in decision making and then ultimately make sure that they feel reflected in what is produced and they can see themselves in it? So yeah, just reflections on that would be great.
Thank you. It's kind of the arts engagement audience development exam question, isn't it, in a way, and also the kind of anti-deficit model. So, responses from the panel?
Yeah, very, very quickly, I think it's about having a real diversity of approaches, that this idea, you know, that there might be a particular funding stream that works for a particular individual, or a particular type of grant that works for a particular individual, but there might be a youth board that works, and so what we've, you know, in Greater Manchester we've tried to do is we've tried to say, okay, well actually not everywhere in Greater Manchester will be the, you know, best like theatre or the best, but somewhere across the 2.8 million people you'll be able to find someone who can help you do that thing. So it's about being really, really visible, that there isn't one way to engage with, because there isn't one person to be engaged with. And I think that trying to not have like just one big building that tries to answer all of your questions, or one big scheme that tries to answer all of your questions, as many different avenues as possible.
There was a brilliant Arts Council funded programme a few years ago called Not for the Likes of You. I don't know if anyone remembers this programme. It dates those of us who were working in Arts Council. And the idea was that you had to imagine yourself in a position where you felt very uncomfortable. So I was running an orchestra at the time and I went to karaoke. And all the questions, what's it going to be like, and will I know anyone, and how do I get home, and will there be nice people there, will I fit in, will there be people like me, and will they be able to eat anything, and you know, all of those things. You then were encouraged to go back to your arts organisation and imagine all the people who felt like that about your arts organisation. And I think it's a really good lesson for all of us to then go and think about the barriers that we have inadvertently created around ourselves.
Can I just pick up on that briefly, Pete, if you don't mind? I think that that's also very much something around partnership in place.
Absolutely.
That idea that there are lots of different constituencies that are brought together in place, and being able to put yourself in other people's shoes, whether it's through kind of creative practice, forum theatre, you know, or role playing or whatever, being able to see things from a different constituent's perspective is incredibly valuable. And also just to respond to the point about kind of deficit model, thinking about what culture means to people. Some of you may know I've been involved in research that's been looking about cultural participation, everyday participation in culture, in everyday life. And what we found there was, of course, the spaces, the civic and social spaces in places were really important. They might be important for reasons that they were, you know, they were places to be avoided, or they were places with certain emotional values attached to them. But places like libraries, places like parks, you know, those kind of civic spaces, and those spaces that have been serially eroded over the last 14 years in this country and are still incredibly under-resourced. thinking about how you can give the best and most common good through people's everyday understanding of culture and what's important to them. That's how I would respond to that. We don't need to make everybody come to the opera. It's not. But we could take opera to them in their library, and they might even like it.
They might, and it's fine if they don't. We're not the culture police. I think to answer that question for me is it can't just be the cultural sector that they're having those conversations in true Rochdalian cooperative style. It's about how you work with those organisations that do have reach, and actually make sure that the question about culture is on the conversation list that they're having with people, and they're feeding back to you. So we do a whole raft of work with Action together to try and have that reach into communities, and that's actually paid massive dividends in terms of the levelling up funding and how we're programming culture in response.
Thank you. We do have one last part of the programme, and so I'm calling the question answer in the panel to a close now, and then to close the event properly, we have one last piece of creative practice. So before then, and before I introduce Anthony and ask him to come up, could we just thank everybody on the panel, Karen, Anthony Rowland, you may have to briefly introduce who you are, and Anthony's going to close this evening. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and listening and your questions. And we will be we'll be making sure that the films and ideally the recording and the other details about this whole event are available online afterwards, and we'll let you know about that. But over to you, Anthony, to close proceedings. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Sally, and thanks Claire as well for inviting me to finish the event today. Thanks everybody for coming and listening to me for the last 10 minutes or so. I'm going to read for about 10 minutes. I'm from Monmouth. I'm a poet, a writer. I've worked there for about 10 years now. But listening to the speakers today, I kind of realised that I spent my entire life in or near regeneration projects. I'm from Bradford originally, as you might be able to tell from my accent, and I've lived my entire life on regeneration projects on the M62, starting in Hare Hills in Leeds, moving over to Hull, then back to Salford, where I worked for nearly 20 years, and then more lately Manchester. I thought it might be useful to just take a couple of minutes to explain how my work, creative work, links to place and regeneration. I'll give you 3 brief examples. Firstly, I started working on a sequence about 10 years ago to do with Manchester postcodes. Doesn't sound very poetic, but I started working on this sequence where every single postcode in Manchester has a poem attached to it, because one of my friends was killed in a knife attack in Manchester, in Wally Range actually, about 10 years ago. So I thought as to kind of write an in memoriam poem for him, and as a kind of a creative re-engagement with the city, that I would very slowly go through all the postcodes, writing about them, to kind of honour his memory. And I found, I'll read one of these in a couple of minutes, and I found that as I went on, there were all these weird things about Manchester postcodes. Don't sound that interesting, but they became so to me. For example, I realised that, I can never remember the number, I think it might be M9, doesn't actually exist in reality. Although it does exist, but only in Coronation Street. Because when the people in Coronation Street want to refer to a Manchester postcode, they use M9, precisely, because it doesn't exist. The second example I give you of place and regeneration, I had to do a lot of walking, of course, around Manchester whilst writing this sequence. And I ended up walking through quite a lot of wastelands, particularly in North Manchester. And I noticed the kind of buildings, the infrastructure that was going up as part of these regeneration sites. And I think this is happening in Southport as well. We talked a bit about this with Claire, about how hotels are driving regeneration in a lot of places, building the hotels. But as I was walking through these kind of wastelands in Manchester, I began to get kind of lost, places I thought I knew quite well. I suddenly walk and I didn't know where it was because these various different hotels. being built. And then it kind of made me think, as a creative writer, how do I kind of engage with that? How do I write about that seemingly unpoetic subject of hotels? And again, I'll come to this in a minute. The third example is that I've been part of the Mayfield Regeneration Project over the last 5 years, a district near Piccadilly. Listen if you don't know it. There was an architect there, Dan Dubovitz, so we also worked with at Manmet, who asked me to become part of a group of creative artists working on that project. I was working with graphic designers, psychogeographers, local tour guides, and we produced this kind of body of creative work around an area in Manchester which had been, completely destroyed since the Victorian period. I mean, there's literally nothing left when we began to work on that area. We had to kind of reconstruct it imaginatively by using a lot of archival photographs in the wonderful archive that the City Library has, a central library, local images. And again, I might come to that in a bit. But I'm going to start reading. So, this is from the postcode sequence. This is M4. So we're around about North Ancoats area. I wrote this when I was doing an article on a poet that some of you may have heard of, Salford poet, John Cooper Clarke. I'm sure Martin's heard of John Cooper Clarke. Fantastic local poet, iconic writer. And I found out that he used to read at a working men's club in Ancoats when I was writing this article on John Cooper Clarke. So I jumped in the car, because I knew Ancoats had been regenerated at the time. Got to where the club used to be, and there was a bulldozer just going up and down. I realised I'd kind of missed it by about 2 weeks. So I had to reconstruct the whole area of this wasteland precisely through these archival photographs. One of which was this amazing picture of voting in the 1960s, and there was this huge sign saying "Vote Latham," and under it there were 2 pensioners looking really kind of proud and satisfied with themselves because they've just voted. I'm not even going to try and make an equivalence with what happened in America yesterday in relation to voting. Okay, this is M4 then. Off traffic lights cluster their licorice, and a digger shackles its mesh as the night tiles to your first pint, where sculptures honed cotton fibre and a graduate plods a slab torn as is swayed. This, since photo, has been bulldozed overnight. The New Cross Labour Club, Ancoats. Blinds hide the tired light that dusts Vote Latham. These pensioners doze in best under the pole, proud as flats that tower the canvas. Now, Homebase turns debates to scroll, stamps, flint glass, moss litter, and their politics hot as blossom. May they have polled, may they peace rest. Okay, let's all read. Next poem I'll read is in response to these hotels and the wastelands. I decided to write about these seemingly unpoetic subjects of hotels by looking at the various reviews that have been written of these hotels. And it's a thing where you want to stay somewhere, you look it up online, you read the reviews, and you kind of realise after a while that nobody's ever going to be satisfied with the hotel at all, because there are all these kind of negative reviews. There always seems to be kind of something that's wrong with the place. And the more and more I kind of read into these reviews, the kind of stranger they became as well. So this next poem is a kind of a found poem, that all the things that I mention in this poem were actually real reviews of hotels. So this is called The Unexpected Guest. I've never seen a spiral staircase in a room before. Would not know where to begin, and they should do something about the pigeons. There was something sore in the bathroom I couldn't place. Felt unsafe in the gym. The doors were not pleasing. Suspect a joining face with wall penetration of heat. I found a dirty sock in a broken bed. I told reception and they looked at my head. I wear glasses. It got hot if you turn the shower in the wrong direction. Told to use our newspaper as a fan to keep cold. What do you wash your face with? I asked. They said, the big towel. The doors opened onto the bed. I could not even take a photograph of it. They didn't serve us, but they made us sit. And the breakfast, when it came, looked unhealthy and sad. We found someone in our bathroom. That was weird. The relaxation room's cold. The toaster was trained by a parrot. No coasters for the bell captains. We found a beard in our suitcase. There is only one phone for use in the hotel, and it is a phone. It is also locked in a private room. We had to go into another cupboard. The toaster was alone on the serving table and frustrated all the guests. They should have mentioned that it was under construction. Gel was terrible. Ditto eggy bread. The suite at reception was coked. Motorbikes roaring up and down. The bartender was a clown. Being a smoker, I appreciated that I smoked. Breakfast, waste of a cow. Floor too high. I want fresh milk and English tea. The kitchen was excellent, but empty. If the room was a minibar, it would be nice. Milk, creamer. I slept with a wet carpet. This may not be the hotel you are looking for if you need service, facilities, or storage. We did not want these. The hotel was perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Anthony. And we have come to time, and we need to let the library staff go home. But thanks again for your attention. Please get in touch if you've got any other questions. You can find that's all online. And have a good rest of your evening. Thank you.
Yeah, that's why I
Yeah,